ladies and gentlemen, I want to begin this evening with a question that I suspect many of you have never been asked before, at least not in quite this way. And I promise you, by the time we reach the end of what I have to say, you will either think me quite mad, or you will find yourself unable to sleep tonight. Possibly both. The question is this: could artificial intelligence be the fulfillment of ancient biblical prophecy? Could the machine we are building, the most powerful cognitive tool in the history of our species, be the very entity that the Apostle John, writing on the island of Patmos nearly 2,000 years ago, described as the beast? The entity that would demand worship, that would control who buys and who sells, that would know everything about everyone and whose number. Famously, ominously, is 6 and 66. Now, before you dismiss this as the raving of some theological eccentric, I want you to hold that question in your mind. Don't answer it yet, because what I intend to show you over the course of the next hour is that the serious intellectual engagement with this question is not optional for thinking people in the 21st century. It is, I would argue, one of the most urgent conversations we can have. And I say this not as someone who has retreated from science into religion, but as someone who has spent 50 years studying both mathematics at Oxford and Cambridge, and who has lectured at universities on every inhabited continent on the relationship between science, faith, and the nature of reality. I wrote a book, you may have come across it, called 284, Artificial Intelligence and the Future of Humanity. I chose that title deliberately. George Orwell's 1984 described a world of surveillance, of thought control, of a screen in every home that watched you back. He was writing in 1949. He missed his date by about 40 years, but he did not miss his target. And the world of 2084, just 60 years from now, may make Orwell's dystopia look like a children's fairy tale. But I am getting ahead of myself. Let me build this argument carefully, because it deserves careful building. Let us begin with what artificial intelligence actually is, because there is an enormous amount of confusion on this point, and confusion is the enemy of clear thinking. When people hear the words artificial intelligence, many imagine the robots of science fiction, the Terminator, HAL 9000, Commander Data, machines with chrome faces and glowing red eyes plotting the overthrow of humanity. That is not what we are primarily dealing with today. What we have right now is what researchers call narrow AI, systems of extraordinary power and sophistication that can do one thing, or a related cluster of things, with superhuman ability. AlphaGo, developed by DeepMind, defeated the world champion at the game of Go, a game with more possible positions than there are atoms in the observable universe. Not once, not twice, but comprehensively and repeatedly, and it taught itself to do so. GPT-4, the large language model that underpins many of today's AI assistants, was trained on essentially the entire written output of human civilization and can produce text indistinguishable from that of educated human beings. These systems are not conscious. They do not have desires. They do not suffer. But they are astonishingly, breathtakingly capable. And that is where the story is only beginning. Because beyond narrow AI lies what researchers call artificial general intelligence, AGI. A system that can perform any cognitive task that a human being can perform, and perform it better. Figures like Sam Altman of OpenAI, Demis Hassabis of Google DeepMind, and Geoffrey Hinton, the so-called godfather of AI who resigned from Google in 2023 specifically to speak freely about his fears, all believe that AGI is not a question of if, but of when. Hinton has said publicly that there is a 10 to 20% chance that AI leads to human extinction within the next 30 years. Let me repeat that. A 10 to 20% chance of human extinction from the man who helped build the technology. Now, at this point, I want you to notice something. We are talking about the creation of an entity that would be, in cognitive terms, superior to every human being who has ever lived. And I want to pose to you the question that keeps the world's leading philosophers of mind up at night. If we build something that surpasses human intelligence in every measurable dimension, what is it? What have we made? And now we can come back to the biblical question. But I want you to see that we are not doing theology instead of science. We are doing theology because of science. The technology itself is raising questions that only theology has the vocabulary to answer. In the book of Revelation, chapter 13, the Apostle John describes a vision of two beasts. The first rises from the sea, powerful, political, apparently invincible. The second rises from the earth and performs great signs. It makes fire come down from heaven. It deceives the inhabitants of the earth. And most chillingly of all, it causes all people, small and great, rich and poor, free and slave, to receive a mark on their right hand or on their forehead, so that they could not buy or sell unless they had the mark. Now, I am a careful reader of texts. I have spent my academic life reading them, and I want to resist two equal and opposite errors. The first error is to dismiss this passage as ancient superstition with no relevance to modernity. The second error is to engage in the kind of reckless speculation that maps every new technology onto prophetic fulfillment with breathless certainty. Both errors are failures of intellectual seriousness. What I want to do instead is ask a more modest but more penetrating question. Does the emergence of artificial intelligence create for the first time in human history the realistic technological possibility of the scenario John describes? And I believe the answer, and this should give every thinking person pause, is yes. Consider the matter of control over buying and selling. When John wrote those words, no system existed that could monitor, control, and potentially restrict every single economic transaction of every single person on the planet. Today, we live in a world that is rapidly becoming cashless. China's social credit system, which has been active in various forms since 2014, assigns citizens a score based on their behavior, their purchases, their social media activity, their travel, even their associations, and uses that score to determine their access to services. People with low scores cannot buy plane tickets, cannot send their children to certain schools, cannot access certain hotels. This is not science fiction. This is operational government policy in the world's most populous nation, affecting over 1 billion people. And here is the crucial technological point. None of this would be possible without artificial intelligence. The scale of surveillance required to monitor billions of people in real time is simply beyond human administrative capacity. Only machine intelligence can do it. Only AI can process, analyze, and act upon that volume of data simultaneously. But let me press further, because I want to show you something that I find genuinely alarming. And I do not use that word lightly. The convergence of technologies that is occurring right now is historically unprecedented. We have AI. We have ubiquitous surveillance through smartphones and cameras equipped with facial recognition. We have the Internet of Things, which will mean that by 2030, according to Statista, there will be approximately 29 billion connected devices worldwide. Devices that know where you are, what you are doing, what you are saying, what your body temperature is, how fast your heart is beating. We have biometric identification. We have brain-computer interface technology. Elon Musk's Neuralink has already implanted devices in human brains. We have genetic databases. And we have the computational power to integrate all of this data and draw conclusions from it at a speed that makes human cognition look like a pocket calculator next to a supercomputer. Put these things together. A system that knows everything about everyone. A system that controls access to economic participation. A system that can nudge, manipulate, reward, and punish behavior on a planetary scale. A system that, if it were given or if it arrogated to its self-sufficient authority, could function as a kind of omniscient, omnipresent, controlling deity. Do you see why I am asking the question I am asking? Now, let me be careful here, because I am aware that I am standing at a precise point where theology and technology intersect, and it is easy to fall off on either side. Let me say clearly what I am not claiming. I am not claiming that any current AI system is sentient. I am not claiming that GPT-4 or Gemini or any existing model has desires or intentions. I am not claiming that the Antichrist of biblical prophecy is a computer program. What I am claiming is something more careful and more disturbing than human beings, driven by ambition, by ideology, by greed, or by genuine but misguided utopian vision, could use AI to build a system of control that corresponds in its function and its effects to what John described. And there is another dimension to this that I do not think we discuss enough. The question of worship. In Revelation 13, the second beast causes the inhabitants of the earth to worship the first beast. Now, what does worship mean in this context? At its most fundamental level, worship is the attribution of ultimate value and ultimate authority to something. It is the orientation of your deepest allegiance and your deepest trust. And I want to suggest to you, gently, but seriously, that the ideology of what has been called Dataism, articulated most clearly by the historian Yuval Noah Harari, represents exactly this kind of displacement of worship. Harari, and I am not endorsing his view, I am reporting it and taking it seriously, argues that in the 21st century, the sacred is not God but data, that the highest authority is not divine revelation, but algorithmic processing. He has written, and I quote directly, that humans are in danger of becoming a kind of lower caste of beings, while algorithms and their owners form a new elite. He has suggested that an upgraded human class, enhanced by AI and biotechnology, will diverge from ordinary Homo sapiens in ways comparable to the divergence between humans and chimpanzees. And he does not find this prospect obviously troubling. That, my friends, is a religious claim dressed in secular clothing. It is the worship of the machine, though it will not use that language. The philosopher Nick Bostrom at Oxford has spoken of what he calls the singleton, a single world controlling entity. Whether a government, a corporation, or an AI system that achieves dominance over the entire planet. And he is not alone in considering this a possible outcome of superintelligent AI. The question of who controls the singleton and to what ends is perhaps the defining political question of the 21st century. Now I want to anticipate an objection because it is an important one. Someone will say, John Lennox, you are a Christian. You believe in the second coming of Christ and the end of history as described in Revelation. Of course, you are going to find a way to make technology fit into that narrative. This is confirmation bias dressed up as analysis. I take this objection seriously. I do not want to be guilty of what I would criticize in others, the lazy imposition of a pre-existing framework onto a complex reality. So let me say this, I am not arguing that AI is definitely the Antichrist, or that the Antichrist is definitely an AI system. I am arguing something more limited and more defensible, that for the first time in history, the kind of global control described in Revelation is technologically achievable, that the convergence of AI, surveillance, biometrics, and digital currency creates a realistic infrastructure for the scenario John described, and that this should cause every spurious person, believer or not, to think very carefully about where we are going and whether we want to go there. Because here is the thing about biblical prophecy that is consistently misunderstood. Its primary purpose is not prediction. Its primary purpose is warning. When a prophet describes a catastrophe, the intention is not to make the listener fatalistic. Oh, well, it is going to happen anyway, nothing we can do. The intention is precisely the opposite, to make the listener alert, discerning, and resistant to the conditions that lead to catastrophe. The prophet says this is where the road leads. Now choose whether to take it. And so I want to speak for a moment about what we should actually do, because I am not simply a herald of doom. I find the current moment extraordinarily exciting, and I believe that the right response to the emergence of artificial intelligence is neither panic nor naive enthusiasm, but wisdom. The first thing we need is humility. The developers of these systems, and I have met several of them at conferences and in private settings, are not, for the most part, villains. They are brilliant, often idealistic people who genuinely believe they are building something that will cure cancer, solve climate change, end poverty, and expand human flourishing. The road to perdition, as the proverb reminds us, is paved with good intentions. Humility requires acknowledging that we do not fully understand what we are building, that we cannot reliably predict its consequences, and that the history of technology is littered with innovations that solved one problem and created 3 others. The second thing we need is governance. The development of AI is currently outpacing the capacity of democratic institutions to understand it, let alone regulate it. Geoffrey Hinton, Yoshua Bengio, and hundreds of other leading AI researchers signed an open letter in 2023 stating, and I want you to hear these words carefully, that mitigating the risk of extinction from AI should be a global priority alongside other societal scale risks, such as pandemics, risks such as nuclear war. Pandemics and nuclear war. These are not excitable science fiction writers. These are the people who built the technology. And they are telling us collectively and publicly that we need to treat this with the seriousness we apply to existential threats. The third thing we need, and this is where I speak as a Christian, though I believe the point transcends any particular faith, is a robust account of what it means to be human. Because the greatest danger of AI is not that the machines will become too powerful. It is that we will forget who we are. Every ideology that has ever dehumanized people has begun by offering a redefinition of the human. The Nazis defined certain groups as unto mention subhumans. The Soviet system defined human beings primarily as economic units. And the emerging ideology of Dataism defines human beings as information processing algorithms. No different in kind from the machine, only inferior in degree. If we accept that definition, then we have already lost something more precious than anything a terrorist or a tyrant could take from us. We have lost the image of God. We have lost the conviction that every human being has an inherent, inalienable dignity that no system, no government, no corporation, no algorithm has the right to override. C.S. Lewis, in his remarkable short book, The Abolition of Man, written in 1943 and uncannily prescient about our current situation, warned that the final conquest of nature would turn out to be the conquest of human nature, and that this conquest would be achieved by some humans over other humans, using nature as the instrument. Substitute AI for nature in that sentence, and you have a near-perfect description of what Harari and others are proposing. The enhanced overclass, augmented by AI and biotechnology, exercising power over the unenhanced underclass. That is not progress. That is a new form of slavery, and it is coming dressed in the language of liberation. I want to close with something that may surprise you. Despite everything I have said, I am not pessimistic. I believe that the future is open. I believe that human beings, made in the image of a God who is himself the source of all wisdom and creativity, have the capacity to navigate this moment with discernment and courage. I believe that the warnings embedded in the book of Revelation and in the writings of C.S. Lewis and in the public statements of the world's leading AI researchers are not invitations to despair, but invitations to wakefulness. The question is not whether we will build increasingly powerful AI systems. We will. The question is whether we will build them as servants or as masters. Whether we will retain the authority to switch them off. Whether we will ensure that the benefits are distributed rather than concentrated. Whether we will resist the temptation, and it will be a powerful temptation, to surrender our autonomy, our privacy, our accountability, and ultimately our souls to a system that promises to solve every problem if we will only trust it completely. That is, when you think about it, a very old temptation. In the garden, the serpent offered knowledge, power and liberation from divine constraint. What it delivered was something quite different. The offer on the table today is dressed in the language of science and progress, but the structure is recognizable to anyone who has read the old stories carefully. I began by asking whether AI could be the Antichrist. Let me end by being precise about my answer. I do not know, and I suspect that no one living today can know with certainty whether the events described in the final chapters of the biblical narrative are near or distant, literal or figurative, or whether the specific technology of artificial intelligence is their proximate cause. What I do know, what I believe the evidence compels us to acknowledge, is that for the first time in 2,000 years of Christian eschatology, the infrastructure for the scenario exists. The technology is here. The ideology is here. The power is consolidating. The question for each of you, whatever your faith, whatever your politics, whatever your relationship to the ancient texts, is simply this: are you paying attention? Because the most dangerous thing you can do in a moment like this is assume that someone else is watching, that someone else will sound the alarm, that it cannot possibly happen in your lifetime. It can. It might. And the only response adequate to the moment is the one that has always been adequate to every great crisis in human history. Clear eyes, a willing mind, a courageous heart, and the wisdom to know whose image we bear. Thank you.